Hello again, my name is Kent Dahlgren. I'm working on Lucy and the Oracle, and by extension, Exocortex. I wanted to share some work that I've been doing for several years it's the reason I got very inspired by the things that I read about Lucy, the Oracle, the Exocortex hat token, because I can see alignment between the work that I've been doing in the real world and online, and the actual aspirations and the part of the nation. So it's a model that we call the 214 org model, and I'll give some background on it in a moment, but it represents a true, in my opinion, it may represent a true cybernetic organism between team execution, individual cognition, and machine learning. So the genesis of what we call the 214 collaboration is that we are, there's about 450 of us, and we are all very experienced pranksters. We've all been, you can call us trolls or whatever. In my family, going back generations, we are people who like to architect pranks, and it's what we do. It's our whole purpose for existence. So, and you know, I remember asking my grandma things like, you know, where do I come from? And she'd say, I don't know, you're adopted. And then she just holds a straight face. So it's one of those things. It's like, that's how the family functions. And so, you know, what we are is a lot of us have been pranksters for a very long time. And in the context of media, as it's evolved to become something that's easily hackable and manipulated, we become puppet masters, if you will. We become, a puppet master might be somebody who can run, say, a dozen fake profiles, and in so doing, dominate what is perceived to be an actual conversation. So when you get multiple puppet masters back to back coordinating, create a completely false reality, and you can do it in a way that completely befuddles normal people, which we find to be hilarious. So in the context of any, you know, investigative journalism, what it's easy to do is architect hoaxes that spill into the mainstream media, which is, you know, the whole thing that we do. And I wouldn't admit that this is ours because it seems pretty bold to admit, at least on camera, that MSN was trolled into believing that Mike Pence claimed that over half the Women's Day March, you know, but it's one of those, you know, the first rule of Fight Club is not to admit that there's a Fight Club. However, Snopes did debunk that. This is the sort of thing that, you know, a collective such as ours might aspire to do. We might enjoy it. In fact, this is why we came together, because we found that we are like-minded and we enjoy putting these things together. This is fun, right? This is, you know, what they say, for the lulz. You do it because you want to have fun. So in terms of why it works, there's actually a psychological basis for this. There's a guy who was director of psychology at University of Chicago named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he talks about what's referred to as autotelic experiences. Now, I've done a lot of software product design and hardware product design, for instance, copier machines or other devices. And you can architect a user interaction experience that engages the person such that they are in what's called an autotelic experience. A perfect example is games. If you find a really, really good game that's got the good mixture between an interface and good gameplay and a story, you might emerge from that game 12 hours later and go, what happened to me, right? That's an autotelic experience. But another great example might be rock climbing or any other sorts of things. And there's actually a psychological basis. And when you find this division between, this line between challenges and skills with quick feedback loops, it creates this autotelic experience that transcends your, you keep track of time. It actually unlocks a serotonin feed. It's a deeply satisfying experience. And so, you know, that's why we will do it. We'll be back-to-back architecting the manipulation of various media across social media or other, and we do it to impress one another, but also because it's a challenge. It's fun, right? So, in fact, as it turns out, this maps nicely to another psychological framework called cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, research shows that cognitive behavioral therapy used properly actually thickens the prefrontal cortex, actually thickens the gray matter. So when you are engaged in a positive manner, you have an event, you do a thought, and it's a positive emotion, and you have an action, you actually create, you actually strengthen your brain, you improve your brain. Not exactly transhumanism, but it is an example of using psychology to actually improve your condition. Interestingly, when people are manipulated within the context of social media to ratchet from one extreme thing to the other, that actually uses CBT to hack the brain in a negative way. It actually causes the opposite effect, which would result in higher anxiety, greater propensity to violence, etc. So that's the psychological part of it. That's the psychological why people get hooked on the type of hoaxes we do. It's the enjoyment of it. The problem we've got is that the very best people, as I talked about yesterday, the very best practitioners we have in transhumanism transitional housing or homeless. And so the biggest reason we lose them is exposure, suicide, or arrest. And that's the truth of it. And you might not think that's the case, but you know, when we talk about that intersection between nothing to lose meets something to hide, they end up being very, very good at what they do, and they end up not having to have a hacking platform properly. They're very good at using higher order tools to affect change across a very large number of platforms. So I don't know what it is about me, but what I want to be able to deliver on is continuity and execution despite attrition, because attrition happens. We want to be able to continue to execute. And in fact, software engineering teams in large companies, and what happens inevitably is the person you need the most ends up completely falling off the face of the earth when you need them the most. So what you end up having to do is architect some degree of continuity planning, and you have to do it in a way that's incorporated within the design. So what I put together was essentially a collective that used play to advance org. Org would be an organizational competency which transcends a media platform and is able to overcome high rates of attrition. In fact, the measure that I went for was 300% attrition. Am I able to deliver? Is the organization able to deliver upon control objectives, even though you lose everybody 3 times? Can it pull that off? But that's what happens, you know, over the next several years, people leave, people come, that's just how things go. The organization has to be able to transcend the individual. That's all there is to it. So what we use is we use play to advance it. Our engagement in gameplay within this collective modify the best practices into what we call org. And then it gets all the more complex from there. What you see here is a screenshot from a group that we call Alchemy. And in fact, there's a lot of people don't know that in chess, the pawn can be promoted to queen. And so there, what we find is a lot of the gameplay that people participate in are in pursuit of political gains. What they want to be able to do is to give power of the media to those who might not be able to have that capability. So there ends up being an engagement at that level as well. So this gets a little bit deeper. So I went into the psychology of it. I went into the cognitive behavioral therapy, autotelic experiences, et cetera. A framework for orchestrating decision-making called UDA. And it was developed during the Korean War, and it was developed to help fighter pilots maintain a state of radical regardless of what's going on. And UDA stands for Observe, Orient, Decide, and Act. And each of the loops, as you see, feedback. I won't go into too much detail on this, but the framework is in use within corporations, within teams. It's well documented within. And UDA is an extremely effective framework. In fact, it maps to CBT very nicely, natively, if you will. So if you are having a team, if you have a team that's architected in such a way that they're using UDA as a decision-making process, and the outcome is something that's positive and they enjoy it, you almost inadvertently trigger a CBT hacking of the cognition. So as it turns out, this is really just describing in scientific terms why a team feels good, right? When you've come together, and most of us hopefully have experienced this. You are part of a team that maybe has 3, 5, or 7 members, and for some reason, man, things come together, and you're like, wow, this feels good. Look what we've done. Look what we've done. And you enjoy it. You find yourself almost addicted to it because it felt so good. What this is showing you that there is a state that you enter that transcends individual human, actually creates something else altogether. I'll go further because I made an adaptation to the UDA framework, and in fact, I'll go into greater detail. Under the Orient phase, you'll see a modification there. What those are what I call personality facets, and I'm going to talk about how those were created in a moment. But the way this works in practice is that the team will cycle people in and out as needed to address a particular issue. And tangible form, an example might be there's a chat application called Wicker. It's an extremely stripped down version of a chat app. Doesn't have a whole lot of messages, are limited to chats that have 10 members, and you can set a fuse to each message. So know who has a certain competency. As you're addressing issues, you can cycle them in and out. You can say, okay, I need these types of people to give us their input. Okay, let's put them aside. Let's bring these people in. And what it helps orchestrate is a collective cognition, if you will. In fact, that's how we'll function when things are really going. And to put things in context, when we're doing what we consider a high scale op, we're running across various social media platforms, and it's impacting tens of millions of people. So things are happening, and they're happening really, really fast. So what has to happen is an evaluation of the situation and then an execution immediately. But we have to assume that people are going to vanish. In fact, that's what happens. Their accounts vanish or something happens. And so it has to happen very, very fast. So there's still the orient phase, the observe phase. The first phase is we observe what's going on out there, right? And there's a lot of input, unfolding circumstances, outside information, unfolding interaction with the environment, and of course, feedback from the prior cycles. But then it goes right into the orient phase, which is let's do an orientation of what's going on. What orientation of what exactly is happening. And you might see this in an executive staff, or you might see this in an engineering team that uses Agile Scrum. These sorts of things happen out there in nature. So the next thing is to decide what you're going to do. We make a decision. This is what we're going to do. And in fact, improper execution of OODA lacks this cycle. At some point, you have to decide. Just decide. We don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. You have to decide, because this is a framework that is all about and embracing failure. Just do it. Just try. Just try. Just try. And then act. Capture the feedback and continue doing it. So I want to go into the details about the personality facets. I had been, again, managing engineering teams for a very long time. And what happens, and I don't know to what extent many of you know this, but in large companies, what happens is that human resources will bring you in and then subject you to psychological testing. They'll say, let's use Myers-Briggs, or use the Kiersey group, or let's use DISC or whatever, and find out what your personality profile is. And then they'll place you into a group. So there is an orchestration of personality types that has an aggregate mix of personality types. And the idea is to try to orchestrate a creative abrasion. If you had everybody on the team that was like me, it would be awful. I mean, I might enjoy it, but you won't get anything done. What you need is a mixture of personalities and alchemic collection, if you will, something that might be counterintuitive. But this is a known fact within large companies. They do this a lot. So they will do how they achieve an organizational psychological diversity, because they'll bring people in of a certain type, et cetera. So I've worked with these frameworks before, but those frameworks are not comprehensible to those people that are engaged in pranks. Not everybody comes from high tech, so they didn't really get that. So furthermore, I was trying to find more puppet masters within the context of media, Twitter, Facebook, all these other medias that are out there. And the defining feature of a puppet master is they're using a variety of completely false profiles. Their primary communication is obfuscation. So what I begin to use are tools within the domain of computational forensic linguistics and other type of areas, trying to see through where these people are. You know, regardless of what you present to me, is that even though they were employing a kaleidoscopic array of fake profiles, what emerged from the ether was a certain personality that would and that's where I began to figure out, okay, that's who these people are. There's ultimately one puppet master behind this kaleidoscopic projection of fake profiles. And so as I started to annotate the characteristics of those, I started to build profiles. And I'll go through these in a second, but I have different names for them. And I've done political advocacy, grassroots political advocacy. So I found that they resonated to things that I'd observed in the wild. So one I call Whoppin Shawn, which you can barely see, but it's a black circle and it says Pashtun in a very, very, very dark set of words. And so so I had done political advocacy as a skateboarder. And again, you know, in the 80s, the police would pick us up, beat us up, and leave us out by the terminal somewhere. And the neighbors' kids would do that, and it creates a ruthlessness among kids. Like you either quit or you continue fighting, and you know that you can't win by fighting in the open. You have to get very creative. And so the first thing that happens is there's this type of personality that emerges to the top, and it's kind of like if you beat a dog, the dog bites back. It's a very problem with it is that in its rawest form, it's a very self-destructive, not very helpful characteristic. It needs to be mixed with a wisdom, right? So what I called is I came up with the name Whoppin Shawn. It's an old Scottish term that has to do with troops being assembled for whatever. It's a word, it just shows it out of thin air, but it turns out people dig it, right? It's branding. On the context of online, they like it. I liked it. So, and in fact, I like the story, The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. The first paragraph is the whole story, which is basically the protagonist waits and capitalizes on the antagonist vulnerability, which is ego, and capitalizes on it. So there's some wisdom to it, right? There's subtlety. And so, you know, what we needed to do was evolve. I want, in the context of this online media, there's these people that I call Whoppin Shawn, and they're fairly easy to spot. They're like what I would call a deranged shark in their ecosystem of remoras, right? And what I needed wasn't them. I needed the ones that were just a step back there. So I started to think about what is the complementary competency, and that would be what I call selvage. So selvage is pulled from the domain of sewing, right? It's the selvages help the hems from fraying, right? And it's a nice metaphor, and as it turns out, that nicely describes what a selvage competency would do. And I was able to affect significant evolution on the part of investing in the selvage competency, because what it did is it fabric within which this Whoppin Shawn execution could actually land and be placed. It stabilized them. It actually lent an air of wisdom to what they were doing. If you want to know what the personality characteristics is, they're often single moms, because frankly, they don't get upset about what goes on online because they got 2 kids and an absent dad, right? They end up being perfect for this sort of thing. So the selvage quality in a significant manner. So if I'm going to put together a team for an operation, I would find somebody who's a Whoppin Shawn, the type of person who kicks in the window, and I'd want to pair them with somebody who has got a selvage quality, and then try collaboration that would not normally occur in nature, right? Something that would allow them to capitalize on each other's tendencies. I would observe that selvage is essentially a female quality, because the externally presented characteristics are the ones that are most typically associated with female behavior. So I've just referred to the third competency, which is what I consider alchemy. And alchemy is a word that I love, but it implies quantitative inputs and deterministic magic. You don't really know what's going to happen. There's an alchemic quality to this. So it's essentially matchmaking. And so the alchemic context of bringing these personalities together is one that is able to say, let's bring these people in, let's pull these people out, but to do so in a way that requires a little bit of art. That's a tough skill to cultivate. The competency of mycelium has to do with basically seeding the network with information. We were talking about memetics. We use a lot of memetics to recruit. So what we'll do is we distribute a lot of videos or images or other things, and we take excerpts of our curriculum and encode them and embed them and essentially use steganography. And what we're looking for is that teeny percentage of the population who tend to the details and trying to solve puzzles. I don't want everybody, I want less than 1%. And those who can navigate our labyrinth of nonsense are the ones that I want. I want the puzzle makers. So the competency of mycelium are the ones that might think, how can I seed the fabric of our shared existence in a way that finds the others, finds the others, finds the others. So it is a funny term. It's actually this really old term from the Cold War. It has to do with counter espionage or something, but it is terrifying. In fact, the whole 214 collaboration scares the living crap out of trolls that are trying to figure us out, because they can't tell if we're some sort of troll collective or some government thing, and it makes me laugh so hard, it's hilarious, right? So if they dig into this, they get really, really freaked out, and I love it. I just laugh and laugh and laugh. There's frankly nothing more fun than trolling trolls. So the best thing is, like, for instance, we'll have an entire forum that we've spent years populating with complete and utter nonsense. It makes it sound like we're cash positive, which is so not true. It's hilarious. And then we'll put them in there and say, okay, well, we've brought you in, we're recruiting you, but we're at the end of the fiscal quarter, so things are moving fast. And then 4 minutes later, we kicked them out and said that management felt that that was premature, and they just are left spinning. They can't figure out what they just saw. So, you know, if you mix our desire for using memetics to feed the mycelium to try to find others with a practice of just never-ending inside jokes, what it creates is this incomprehensible stream of nonsense, which just makes the joke funnier for us, right? Because people who try to navigate up our tailpipe, so to speak, have no idea what's going on. So it's really the scheme of inside joke among close friends. And if you have a culture of trolls or people who are in the lulls, they do it already. They do it all the time. Constant inside jokes and nonsense. And finally, the sarin quality. It's a you know, let's have a bias towards continuous improvement. In fact, I would argue that this is the one that comes closest to what I consider one of the really root values of BitNation, is that we are going to enter in agreements, and at the end we'll be rated for the fitness or the quality of what we've done. But there's some finesse there. Like, you don't want to berate people. You want to embrace creativity, and part of creativity is failure, 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 because success isn't real and failure is not real, just iterations. And so what we want to be able to do is to continue to move towards improvement. So just as an aside, there's a mapping between these competencies and the Kiersey temperament sorter. So I don't expect everybody to know what the Kiersey temperament sorter is. But if there were an HR person with a large company here, they would say, oh, I know what this is and I know how to staff it. This is standard practice among large companies. Is it speaks to the intent of the person and their psychology, not just their psychology. So, what is their intent? And I capture the different competencies under rest and under duress. How does a person revert to? What's the behavior they revert to when they're under pressure versus outward? Map to the DISC profile, just as another example. What I've observed in terms of team makeup is about 7 to 10 members max. Even mix of personality types, that's again the personality facets, and embrace the creative abrasion. So, if you see 7 to 10 members, even personality, people who have worked in software development environments will say, oh, that's a Scrum team. This is, for whatever reason, humans tend to work really well in these little pods, 5, 3, 5, 7. 1 to 2 might be exceptional. The rest will mean well. Some might not be great. There tends to be a rotating group of their execution. What I've really observed is don't put them under like expectations of 70% execution. That's just not how people work. They get completely burned out. You really want them to play, and they get into it. Again, we're talking about CBT, really engaging the fun part of it, what they're doing. And the philosophy is fail fast and fail often. My great uncle talked about this. He'd say, fail fast and fail often. Just try, just try, just try. Don't get caught up in trying to do things perfectly. Emphasize the merit and invest in experiment of high tempo experimentation. So bringing it again, I showed this before. Hopefully you can understand that when you've orchestrated decision making, what you can do is bring these facets in and out. You can move them in and out. So talk about the next phase of this is that within the context of BitNation, we refer to DTN, delay tolerant network, right? There are times when the team isn't together. This happens, when we would do political advocacy. We would all say, we're gonna go meet and we're gonna go drain that pool, which means it's hours of emptying a pool of its water so we can skateboard it. And chances are 90% of the people aren't gonna show up, right? Which is aggravating. So you have to count for the fact that people aren't gonna show up. So we'll collapse into an individual mode. And actually, I've been using this extensively. So you can structure your thoughts for the OODA model. And through the use of you can actually enter into the state. So the way that I do it actually is I have these tokens in my pocket. So I've got on the screen here, I've got the WEFT quality and the Whoppin Shawn quality. This is actually another one of my WEFT that's tied to my daughter. She's 4 years old. My youngest daughter almost died of meningitis when she was 5 weeks old. And then I watched the 2 twins do some sort of magic thing, and then the one got better. I don't know what it is, but it was something that was crazy. So blue is the WEFT. It's this WEFT quality. And in the context of sewing, WEFT will connect the selvages, and it allows them to move in interdependent manner. So trying to contemplate, will a plan help the most angry people in homeless camps so they don't revert to suicide bombing? That's a Whoppin Shawn thing. So what I'll do is that I'll use tokens. I'll listen to hip hop because the percussion is essentially a mathematical structure. And I'll use mnemonics, and I enter into a state of autotelic to drop into a delayed transfer node execution, even if the rest of the team is disconnected. When the team gets reconnected, I can drop back into it. So there's a way of using this for yourself, and it works really well. Finally, there's an AI gateway. So this would be what I propose, org to AI XITL. So again, we talked about Lucy eventually evolving to something called exocortex. Exocortex being a shared memory of our prior experiences. So in 2000, Huddle put together AI XI, which is considered a very, very advanced form of AI machine learning. It's not computationally possible. So then he created a derivative of it called AI XITL. As it turns out, it maps nicely to the model we use. So under the orient phase, we would use the AI XITL model I'm proposing. Turing engines within the AI XI model on the left is the OODA model, which is what they would consider policy. So we would be able to bring in decision facets as the AI model is able to work through things. So actually, I got the slides mixed up. What I'm in practice is that through a mobile device or a phone, the pick up on the emoticons, text, voice that we are engaged in, and be able to run through the tools that are readily available now. For example, there are a psycholinguistic and a tonal analysis libraries that are available that will help you understand how Facebook comes to understand you through the use of your language. So we could use these libraries within an AI that could, on the fly, serve as a companion to a team's execution, intuit what is going on with the team, and be able to map to the decisions the team made. And it becomes basically a companion. So what's really interesting about this is that in the context of the exocortex, team members come and go. But that gateway that maintains continuity between the decisions that have been made and the people that have come and gone. So, yeah, so this is where I end up walking around going, okay, we just created a memory bank of human experience, right? So how do we build it? That's what I learned today. How do we build applications on top of that? And of course, then Florian and I went to dinner last night talking about how we build it proper. So the usage, again, would be theoretical. A theoretical example would be a mobile device. And as it turns out, this is possible. This is you can get a library that plugs into Chrome right now that'll use the tonal analysis and the psycholinguistic analysis used by Facebook's advertising algorithm to deconstruct the words you use to understand your cognitive state. That's existing technology. So, you know, computational forensic linguistics can be leveraged, but there's other sorts of tools that can be leveraged within a software agent that might help augment our. So that's it. Any questions?
Wow.